Look, it's RB551. No wonder he got blasted. He's one of those older models programmed by a central computer. Not us. We're independent thinkers. Roger, 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 roger.
Old school like the landline. This man's rhymes kinda sorta like a landmine. I'm stone cold and if I throw it, I'm a landmine. And y'all just need to put a sock in it like mankind. I can't lie. Most of these stands.
All right, so I clicked the button to start the recording. I think things are actually working. I don't know how to make sense of that.
Well, how have you been? Is it hot over there?
Yeah, it's really hot. We're kind of hiding inside right now, but it's the last bit of hotness, and we should start cooling down.
Good.
And
Yeah, I see
I
the
got my
fan.
cell phone because I wanted to use my new computer, so I didn't get to use my new computer. But my motivation level is so low that I don't even want to set up the video cameras and stuff. It's not even worth the effort. It's what is the point of this? Just use the cell phone.
That's fine. Yeah, no, this isn't going anywhere special. But feel free to put on your YouTube channel,
How do you know it's not going anywhere special?
You're right, I don't. You can share it with whoever you want. Do you want to give me an idea of what you had in mind? Otherwise, I got kind of a plan of what to go over.
Well, I have we could just pick up as we normally do, talking about stuff. One thing I do want to mention, I'll take this clip out, is I am recording this on a $250 cell phone. So for all the people out there that are like, you can't do this, I don't have the equipment. There's no equipment involved. I have a couple of issues of the basic problems that I have with the whole I'm just going to say COVID on my channel. I don't know why they act like you can't say it. I'm pretty sure you can. The whole problem with the topic surrounding COVID and my approach to science and how it doesn't align to what I know of sciences and basic things, we've had prior discussions for, and I wrote that Medium article on, where I have the the three things of how you figure out the truth. You got to look for what is not there that should be. What does this mean must be true? And what is the deviation from the expected? And
Right.
if you don't have those three things be meaningful, I really hear a lot of religion. I don't see science. I see people saying, follow the science, which is a basic misunderstanding of what science is. I mean, the whole point of science is to prove everyone wrong, and nothing is ever held in science as this. So when I hear people saying following the science, follow the science, follow the data, and they're not understanding that science is always wrong, that is its premise. And even when it feels like it's right, it says, I think we're right, but we're not going to say we're right. This is a theory. Like germs and gravity are both theories. I mean, people are saying this is definitely true, but you're not even understanding that germs themselves are only a theory.
Right. And that's why there's no such thing as a scientific consensus, right? As you say, because you're always constantly trying to prove one another wrong if you're coming at it from a scientific perspective and you're
Right, it would
trying
be
to
an
prove that.
oxymoron. Scientists can't agree on something. If you're agreeing, you're pretty much not a scientist anymore.
Right. No, I obviously, for those listening who don't know, I come from Maryland, right outside DC, and I've traveled a lot over the past year to 20 something different states. And each state, as I'm sure you know, Michael, because you've done a lot of traveling, each state is like its own little planet. I mean, every state is very different, and COVID is no exception to how they're viewing it. So Maryland right now, from my perspective, is definitely the most freaked out, even today. And I started doing research on COVID because I started seeing a disconnect between the media and what the people were saying, what politicians were saying, and even what scholars were saying. And I wasn't sure why people aren't really approaching each other with these opposing ideas to try and hash things out. But I started realizing, take something like even the definition of a pandemic. It has my mind was blown when I found out that it has nothing to do with how fast a virus spreads.
Right.
It's only how prevalent it is across the world. The fact that it's in many different areas all at the same time. And so by that definition, I started realizing, well, hold on, why isn't every flu season a pandemic then? I mean, the CDC defines the flu season as peaking within 3 months. It's from December to February. And then there's cases, it's like a bell curve. So there's cases at the beginning of that time and at the end. And I don't think people even realize, a lot of people, that we haven't had as many reported COVID cases as we had flu cases, even right now. When you compare it to a normal flu season, or the last flu season we had was, I think, 36 million flu cases. And we're at, I haven't checked recently, I think we're almost at maybe 35 million COVID cases, and that's in like
And
16 months.
what would you what from what you've seen, what is a rough estimate on how many more people are tested for COVID versus how many people are tested for flu? Like, I can't remember ever being tested for the flu.
Right. Well, anything dealing with the flu, even the tests are definitely down. Except for, I think, flu vaccinations might actually be up, but but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, because COVID, I've gotten tested, I think, 3 times. um, and I was negative each time. And that's only because someone else required me to do it. Whether I was like moving in somewhere, or there was another incentive, like through my job or something. But um, it's, I think that the thing with the flu is, and I want your take on this too, is even if, why is on paper, why is the flu disappearing? And when I say disappearing, I don't mean just decreasing. I mean, relative to other flu seasons, it's actually not there. And I kind of want, before I get into the data, what do you think why that is?
The only thing I can say is one argument when we're talking about the data. I always want to make sure people take things and look for information that arises out of the data. They don't try to make up scenarios so that it fits the data. It's got to go the other way around. Something needs to arise from it. So it seems very clear that it's a mislabeling. It's not people with COVID. It's people who have tested positive for COVID. So I believe that the numbers are probably true, that those amount of people tested for the flu have essentially disappeared, while the people tested for COVID have gone off the charts, because people will probably stop testing for the flu and they go, oh, it's COVID, it's something else. There's no logical explanation for the flu to disappear. All the mitigating methods that we've ever done throughout history, nothing's changed, other than the main thing that we've changed is this around the world is the reclassification of this COVID thing and the testing for the COVID thing. We got to remember, America's always America centric. I don't understand why we can't look beyond our borders. But in a lot of Asian countries, if you were sick, it's very customary to wear a mask when you go out in public. And the point there, so everybody knows, isn't because you're actually protecting anybody else. It's just so that people know that you're sick. It's a non-visual representation that you're sick. You're trying to keep your germs to yourself so other people can keep their distance from you if they choose. So mask wearing is new in America, but it's not new around the world. And if we're not seeing, we would have to see that the areas where it was normally worn around the world, that those areas wouldn't see changes, whereas we would see dramatic changes because that behavior changed. Well, I don't see that. So it tells me that the only thing different is the testing procedures.
So a few things there. Let's talk about testing a little bit. So as we both know, on the CDC's website, they admit that you can register as a positive test for COVID-19, but that test might be detecting antibodies from another infection from another family of coronaviruses, such as the common cold. And I think that might explain why you hear such a wide range of symptoms when you have COVID. Is it could be anything from I'm asymptomatic to I have a cold to I have a flu to I'm on, a ventilator. And it's so wide. I think that's because a large chunk of them are probably detecting that common cold variant that doesn't, it's just a runny nose and a cough or whatever. There have been novel diagnostic challenges that I've actually documented in one of my pieces, where, and hopefully you're able to link these pieces.
Yeah,
But
we're totally like everything that Michael puts down there. And I put a lot of stuff out that he says too. And if I'm relying on data, he probably did the research, not me.
right, yeah, I don't know. I became obsessed. I kept surprising myself time after time. It was like everything I thought I knew about this COVID situation was either false, or at the bare minimum confusing. I mean, you could take anything from like uh, variants to hospital overcrowding to mobile morgues to nurses being flown in to incentives within prospective payment system to classify certain patients as COVID so that you get reimbursed for more sums of money to help pay for ventilators and stuff like that. And I feel like there's one other thing I'm forgetting. Hospital overcrowding was a big one though, because uh, it was pawned as a huge new challenge. But I went back and it was really easy to find not just the target occupancy rate, which was about 85%. I think the KPI Institute estimates 85 to 90%, and the National Biotechnology Institute estimates about 80%. But it's somewhere in the
And
ballpark.
remember, so people know, these are the numbers before COVID was even a concept.
Right.
These are the target numbers, and it's not just, it's target about your operational efficiency. It's literally that you would be losing tons of money if you were under 85%. And if you're above it, you're in risk of not being able to perform the duties that you need to do by having enough resources on hand. So they're shooting for 85. That is like the goal as a business to even survive and make money. That's what they're shooting for.
Exactly, because if you have 0 patients, you get shut down in a hospital because it's a business, it's not a nonprofit, just like any other one. Um, and yeah, it's true. If you're below 85% or below 80%, whatever you want to say, then you're below that threshold of reaching optimal, efficient operations. And it's that target is used with this model called the Erlang loss model, which looks at different factors like like if you want to reach a certain level of occupancy, how many resources are needed to reach that point. And if you're above 90%, then you risk overcrowding. But both are well within the norm. And it's also documented that this has been happening for decades. This isn't
and over 100% is very normal. That's one thing when we first talked about this. I said, bro, none of this makes sense to me at all. We constantly diverted resources to other hospitals because the ICUs were overstaffed, just because there was a bunch of shootings in Baltimore. Like it's routine for these things to go over 100%. And for patients to be out in a hallway, for example, is very routine. It's usually just a managerial issue where the staffing on hand didn't balance the reality of what was expected. So you had a little bump, and then everything irons out and you move on.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of wanted your take as a cop. I mean, were you in hospitals a fair amount, or just like after shootings and stuff?
I mean, I would say, especially as a supervisor, nearly every day, if not every other day, you were in hospitals.
Okay, right. So that was a big one. Forget where we were going with this. I mean, we talked about testing. I'm also glad you brought up a country or like Asian cultures, like Japan, who that country, according to various studies I've found, already takes many preventative sanitation measures, whether it's hand washing, whether it's keeping 1.5 meters from the person in front of you. They sanitize their phone when they get home. I'm forgetting a few other variables, but there's this long chart of like everything that this culture does. And there's this
like shaking hands isn't even customary. You go, hi.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I remember as a personal example, I studied abroad in Italy, and they were talking about how people gather in crowds, like in front of a vendor. People don't gather in like single file lines the way we do here in the US. And I'm thinking that there's if that's just one example, there's got to be a plethora of other examples that I'm not able to come up with on the top of my head right now that could play a part. Because, as I know you know this, but a lot of these studies, I really haven't found one study that doesn't have at least one glaring flaw in it on masks, but they're not isolating the variables. They're not saying it could be 100 other things. It's usually some lab controlled experiment that's used on dummies that can't even breathe. Like like they use dummies on the CDC one with double masking. And they said at the bottom, we think this works, but you might have trouble breathing, and I'm thinking,
Nice.
well, that probably didn't bother the dummies that you tested this on. And or like the scene from Sully, the movie Sully, which, by the way, that's not about me, but It's about the pilot, and he's in the courtroom in that one scene, and he's talking about how um, you've taken the human element out of your simulations. Like they did 17 simulations, and they were saying he could have landed that plane back in New York. And Tom Hanks's character Sully is saying, you don't realize how I had to go through all my procedures, all these different steps, and I went through them, and I did the best thing that I could have done in that time. It's like, so these studies are very simulated. There's a small sample size with a lot of them. I know there was one at a hairdresser salon uh, where I think the sample size was only 2. Um, and let's see,
Nice
non-random.
valid study there.
Right. I mean, a sample size of 2, I would think you could probably try and conclude anything. Non-randomized control trials. So if you're not randomizing your groups and your placebo groups, that was another big one. So it was all these little things that were kind of skewing, or not skewing, but at least eliciting a lot of doubt into the validity of them. Now, I'm not doubting that a mask doesn't have a purpose. I think the ASA, I forget exactly what it stands for. It's something Society of Anesthesiologists. I can't say it, but they were saying that you wear a mask in an operating room, or a doctor does at least, to prevent infection with the patients. But as far as the scale of like wearing a mask out in public, I haven't found a study like that in the US. I didn't know if you had found anything, but
No, but
yeah.
I also wouldn't be surprised if the doctors were wrong, because they're also not doing any other isolations with that technique. The mask is a part of a whole set of scrubbing procedures. And if you eliminated that mask and maintained all the other scrubbing procedures, where would you be? I mean, that's another curious question that you don't have an answer to, that you should before you make these conclusions.
Right. Where would you be? um, and actually, the study I cited in my piece did call evidence for that weak and insufficient itself. So, um, and even if you look on the side of like a surgical mask, the side of the box, it says this will not protect you from infection
Right.
from any coronavirus or any respiratory illness. So I think you can point to a country and say, look, they wear a lot of masks and their cases went down, but you could easily do the same. I mean, the if anyone wants to look at, I think, is the most important 2 variables to look at, you would look at um, the reported mask use, which consistently went up throughout last year, and the number of cases reported. So, we had the first wave in like April of last year, and then it went down. Then you had the second wave. Then you had the third monster wave in December through February in the winter. And that's when mask use was reported to be the highest. So if you're saying that masks work to reduce the spread of COVID, then if anything, it's correlated with more cases, and I wasn't sure why that was. I mean, it's counterintuitive as all hell, I'll admit, but I think there's a few different explanations for this. I think one is if you have something on your face, you're more likely to touch it, and so you could be spreading germs, and then they're infecting your face, whatever you're messing with it. I think another is that it filled wearers with a false sense of immunity, and they ceased a lot of other mitigated sanitation measures. Maybe they were touching each other more and getting closer more, and going out more in public. And so I look at that, and then again, I compare it with a country like Japan, and I don't know what to conclude. And you can see, like, from the last piece I wrote, which was a piece titled Excess Deaths in 2020 Are an Unsolvable Puzzle. By the end of it, I said, I don't know how to make sense of all this data. I know it all relates, but like when you have people missing cancer screenings, and domestic abuse is going up, but no one's reporting it, and then you have all these
Suicide,
excess.
overdoses.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Hey, with suicide, I found a lot of localized claims saying suicides have gone up by 60% or like 300% or whatever it was in all these cities. But then the CDC came out and said they actually went down a little bit. But drug overdoses went up, and heart disease also went up by about 31,000. And normally it's about like 5,000 each year. So that was a big leap. And I'm wondering how many of these deaths are just desperation deaths, if you will, or however you want to call it, where it's out of the norm, but it's not because of COVID. It's because of our response to COVID. So
Right. So you don't
Um,
have a non-shutdown example to even compare it to. So that's what I'm saying. If you can't answer what is the deviation from expected,
mhm.
then you can't answer anything because you have no expected. So, like what you're saying, should you expect masks to go up? Mask usage to correlate with the virus going down. Maybe, but that is premised upon, for one, the mask actually doing anything, which maybe it does nothing at all, one way or the other. Like so you're saying, like, you touch your face, but touching your face and the blocking of the particles, maybe that just balances out and it creates a completely neutral effect for actually wearing the mask on a global scale.
Mhm.
And are we comparing it to deaths or cases? Because I see this as a strong parallel with crime data that I'm always arguing about, in that the testing and is to say that there are COVID cases does not mean there are people who have had the germ identified in their body. It means that a testing agency created a thing that told you it was positive. There's no objective reality to the test. I mean, we have seen these be 20 to 30% is the studies I've seen to give false positives. So it's just like crime. Crime is a measurement of what the police are doing, just as cases are a measurement of what the medical profession is doing. It's not a measurement of what people are doing. So if you still can only look at the deaths, the mass you should correspond with a reduction in deaths, because that is the only objective measurement that we have. Just like with policing, the only objective measurement we have is murder.
That's actually something I wanted to confirm with you. So deaths, because there's a body, there's a physical evidence that somebody died. So you don't doubt like the number of people that died. It's just a question of how they died, right?
If it's off by how they died. Yeah, so I don't question that the people died. I mean, I certainly think that sure, are there errors? Yes, but statistically relevant errors? No. I mean, we're talking 1% would be like an extremely high. I mean, I would see a 1% error in deaths to be mind-blowingly high.
Right, right. Okay, gotcha. And like you said, yeah, what is deviated from the expected? I always try to do this in my articles where I would compare it to some kind of data from the past. Even with hospitals, I would say, um, the normal is like around 65 to 75% hospital occupancy across the country, and that's for the past like 40 years. And so we were about 8% above that last December, and the last time we were at that level was in the 80s. But then it was funny because a few weeks later, our hospital occupancy rate dropped, and it was just as normal as it was in 2015. 2015 was the last year the CDC documented hospital over or the amount of people in a hospital. But another thing to consider, Michael, is the number of hospitals has gone down over the years while the population has gone up. And so
Sure.
therefore
There's
the
so
number of
many variables, right?
right, right.
So to say I know something is crazy. It's crazy to say you know something in these areas that are so complex. And the COVID discussion is people saying they know that which they could not possibly know.
Mhm. Right. Or they make a leap of faith and they assume
Right.
something based
Or
on
like you're saying about the masks, it's like the entire opposite is also completely dismissed. So I always want to say, explain to me Skid Row, explain to me the Amish people, explain to me anyone that doesn't have a television isn't aware this is happening. People that didn't have televisions during the plague knew the plague was happening. They didn't need a news anchor to
right.
tell them. Like, I mean, it was in front of your face. We all saw it. If it wasn't for the TV, would anyone see this taking place? Man, I really don't think so. I don't know of anyone who hasn't died, or of any kind of, even if you're talking about, like, say there was a 15,000 jump in deaths. No one's going to notice that in the real world. Once you distribute that among 300 million people plus, like that is not, it's not statistically significant. It's not even enough to say this is because of COVID or because of the lockdown. It could be something else. Like, I was talking to my wife the other day, and you pointed this out, and I think it's true about every profession. When you look behind these doors, and this is why people think I changed, and I did not change. When you look behind these doors, you do not find the information that you expected to find. Everything you are being told about any of these things is a lie. And when you dig into it, you will end up being the crazy person standing there telling the world that what they're believing is, but you're the one that's right. It's like Alex Jones and the gay frogs. Like, that's a real thing, like, I don't understand that that's a real thing.
Yeah, I remember you signed one of your books to me. You said the truth is nearly always counterintuitive. And I've
Yeah.
thought about that a lot, with how much I've either thought I've known and how much I'm probably wrong now. I with this through my research with COVID, I was wrong on a lot of my assumptions. And I think and it's okay to be wrong. I think it'd be weird if like preliminary data was just 100% correct. And like you said,
It's wrong.
like,
It's all wrong. We're supposed to accept that it's wrong. It's just,
right,
it's like people think everything has to be exactly, we're going this to this particular point, but we're not. We're just kind of going in general directions. That's all that science. We're like, oh, well, maybe this is true. Oh, that's not true. So we steer over here. Oh, that's not true. So we steer over there. You're not supposed to be committed to any outcome. I mean, they're I see it very much as a religion, especially the left. I think the right has been religious, but when the left thinks they're any less religious, I think they're mind-blowingly ignorant to the reality of their lifestyles.
right,
These don't align with science. They're not talking, and it's like you're betraying even the immune system. So what do you do about somebody like me? I don't hide about anything that I've done, but I go out in public. I video weddings. I don't wear masks. I shake hands with everybody. I touch all the dirt that I've done my whole life, and I've always welcomed germs. Pocket surfing junkies my whole career, barely ever wore any kind of protection. Like, I wore gloves, like material gloves. They just harbored the germs, like, and it
right.
doesn't actually do anything. But yet, that's how the immune system works. Why did we just dismiss everything we've learned in our lives about how the immune system works? I mean, if you harbor everybody and you tell everybody to isolate, that is what we were all taught is what would hurt your immune system. So if everyone's being isolated, is it reasonable to think that they're going to get sick? Yeah. I mean, I think that's perfectly reasonable. And so something like that shouldn't shock us. What would arise from the data is that when people are indoors, they get sick. It happens in the South. People in the summertime get sick because we're locked inside down here. We in the wintertime, we go outside, but in the north, you
Right.
go outside in the summertime. So it's flipped. That's why like flu seasons and stuff like that are flipped. That's why crime, weather related kind of crime stuff, temperature related crime stuff are flipped between the south and the north, because it's about being inside. It's not about the like
Right.
it's not about playing soccer. It's the fact that you're outside versus inside. And that's a big role in all of this. None of all the hotspots that should be hotspots aren't hotspots. So why is it not Costco? Why is it not Walmart that I go to every day? So I'm in the Walmart, I touch the carts. I never make any mitigating procedures. I'm sorry, I believe in the immune system and it has
Right.
served me well, and I keep it strong. So why would somebody like me that totally disregards everything that's being said doesn't get sick? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, you don't think. I mean, you're speaking a lot about your personal anecdotes, though. I mean, you don't think you're an outlier, maybe, or you
Well,
know?
the thing is, there'd have to be an answer there. So if you have a theory, you must have an answer for why I can go interact with since COVID started. I have interacted and shook the hands of thousands of people, thousands. And so all of those thousands of people, I didn't go wash my hands after each one of them. I just spread the germs around and I don't get sick. I don't even have antibodies. I had to have the
Right.
test to go to Hawaii. So I haven't even been exposed. And I traveled the country. I went coast
Right.
to coast. I've
And
been, I went multiple airplane
same
rides.
here.
This
Same here. Same here. I did all that. Yeah.
doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. And isn't there something about your wife? What is her deal with the virus? She's either immunocompromised or something. What's
Oh, I mean, she has a genetic immune deficiency. I have another friend that has a genetic lung deficiency, and those people have been out and nothing's happened.
Yeah. I mean,
What a
they were.
cold! It's cold, guys.
Well, they would. I think a lot of people would say it's the scale at which how severe. Like you have different viruses, and some are worse than others, but you have to define what worse means, or you have to say,
That means I must see ICU numbers go up. I must see that. That is a necessary prerequisite for saying things have been exacerbated.
okay. I mean, they would say also that what you're doing is you're the one spreading the virus asymptomatically. There's no way to really corroborate that, though,
I
right?
would have to have antibodies.
Okay, right.
This stuff ever aligns with the next thing. That's why I think it's religion. It's like when I say about religion, if you believed in the Christian Bible and the Christian religion of God, you would kill your children before they reach the age of 8.
Right.
Because the Bible is very clear that children, and it's defined as 7 and under, are go to heaven, free ride,
All
right?
right.
The only most responsible thing a parent could do would be to kill their children, and no one's doing that. So I'm sorry, you don't believe in it. If Barack believed in the water rising and the global sea levels rising, he would not buy a $15 million sea level ranch at sea level in Maine. He doesn't believe it. Just like it's obvious that these things don't align. They don't align.
Right. Well, there's there's that claim, exactly that somehow COVID is on a much bigger scale than say the flu, or that it spreads faster. You know, and I'll compare the data and I'll show how there were more flu cases in 3 or 4 months than there were COVID cases in 15 months. But they'll cite a localized study, you know, and it has no real world application that I'm supposed to be comparing it to, or they'll what was I going to say? Oh, the WHO says, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but in the report a few months ago, the WHO actually says that COVID has a longer incubation period than the flu, and therefore the flu spreads faster. The
That doesn't make
CDC
any
says,
sense.
well, the CDC says the opposite. The CDC says that that COVID spreads faster than the flu. So I only bring that up because those are two major. I'm trying to bring up sources that aren't, you know, partisan, so to say, that they're kind of the go-to health
Well,
organization.
you know, another thing that aligns with that, though, when I say what would you expect to see for any of this to be true, if the flu outbreaks, we can watch patterns where they will show a pattern where the clusters will come out of areas. You can see most viruses that we've known in the past, you can watch them spread from their cases and you can watch them be contained in their cases. But COVID, no matter what you do, it's just everywhere. It's like there's a 20 to 30% false positive rate. And the more you get tested, the more it says you have something. And the less you get tested, the less your life is completely normal. It aligns completely with that idea that you're measuring what is tested, not what is actually there at all.
I've seen estimates as high as like 75% false positive, I think, for New York. Because the other thing is they're lumping together, a lot of states were doing this, where they lump together confirmed cases with probable cases, where they just assume, you know, this person has a COVID symptom.
Even that, I mean, if you were using that system, we would have found a country like New Guinea, right, that had like 3 people that had been exposed or something, and you would have been able to lock it down. There would be a success story somewhere if it was in reality, even if you couldn't explain it. There would be, with all these nations, all these variables, there would be a place that just didn't have COVID. People weren't dying, where they had a genetic anomaly like malaria or something, where nobody was getting sick because they were from a certain amount of genetics that had a higher natural resistance. There are no differences around the entire globe. Everyone is preaching the same religion, and there's no differences. As soon as we started testing, when they started testing in New Zealand, 20 to 30% or whatever, you know, people were in New Zealand, people were in Australia, people were everywhere. But that doesn't make sense. If it was in Wuhan, you would have seen patterns like with any other virus we've ever seen in the past. And this one, it's just everywhere already, like it was just the cold. It started testing.
So is your fundamental takeaway then that there's really nothing that we can do to kind of control the virus? It's just going to run its course and do its thing?
Well, I would say there's zero evidence. Here's what I can say. I've seen no evidence that convinces me of anything in the COVID discussion And there is no evidence that distinguishes COVID from the common cold.
Right. There's that emergency CDC handbook. I know that you shared it with me, where on page 39 or 40 or something like that, it says there's no quantified isolated version of COVID or something along the lines of that, where they're saying they admit that they haven't been able to isolate it. And there's the PCR test where it runs its cycles, and once it reaches a certain threshold, it's supposed to tell you what you have. At least that's what I've heard. But the PCR test isn't a diagnostic test. It's a test that aids in diagnosing someone. It doesn't say what you have, and it doesn't even tell you if what you had was even going to be that dangerous. And that's what the inventor of it said.
Isn't that what it does?
Pardon?
Doesn't it just replicate?
I think, yeah. I don't know the exact terminology. I was just quoting the inventor, Kerry Ellis. He said it doesn't even tell you if what you had was even going to hurt.
The person that created it. That's funny.
Yeah. He passed away before COVID came, but that's what he said. There's that PCR test, and then it's also funny because there's this document I shared in one of my pieces where each country, you can go down the list, they're documenting these cases differently too. And a positive test means different things in different countries, even in different states. I think Colorado was one of the first states that started getting rid of probable cases and only counting confirmed, and they saw about a 25% decrease in COVID cases, at least what's on paper. Now,
confirmed by a test that doesn't actually measure the presence of the virus. just saying.
It's so mind-boggling, and I have had a lot of hate thrown my way for saying these things, but let me go over two pieces of really, I think, the biggest takeaways from all of my research as far as what could really be going on, because I'm only trying to say all the things that aren't going on, but
which is all you should be saying scientifically, right? Anything else is just an opinion.
Exactly. And I don't have a medical degree or anything. I'm just looking at this data and trying to see what I can extrapolate from it. But basically, so the CARES Act was passed in late March of last year. And that part of that act, part of the provisions was that anyone, so it's Medicare, so anyone over 65 and up who's diagnosed with COVID gets a 20% premium add-on payment within that hospital's classification system. And it's called a PPS system, which is a prospective payment system. Again, it's this system that has already predetermined fixed amounts of money that are given based on how each patient is classified. So there's all sorts of reasons why you'd be in a hospital. So there's all different classifications, and then you throw in COVID-19. So now there's this new classification, and because they get more money, it's an incentive for hospitals, not individual doctors. This isn't I'm not pulling the conspiracy card, even though conspiracy could just be between two people. It doesn't have to be this grandiose kind of hundreds of people in on it. I'm not pulling that card yet, at least. I think it's just hospitals are saying this person is suspected to be COVID. We need more resources, so we're going to list them as COVID, even if he has these other underlying conditions or comorbidities, whatever you want to call it, already present within them. And the example I give, I try to pull this example out. I'm not sure if it's a good one, but if you order steak on a menu and that steak comes with a small side salad, then within that, the restaurant system on the receipt, it's entered as a steak. It's not entered as a small side salad because more resources went into producing the steak, and the steak costs more. It doesn't mean that all these other ingredients weren't part of it. And even at my last job, we had a database system, and I don't think I can share specifics, but basically we provided services A, B, and C. And let's say A was the cheapest, and then B was a little more expensive, and C was the most expensive. If a client requested services A, B, and C, that order request went into our system as an order C job. It doesn't mean that A and B were not part of it. So when somebody's entered as a COVID patient, it doesn't mean that they also didn't have hypertension and diabetes and heart disease and all these other comorbidities, which the CDC is now saying on average you have 4. It was 2.6. And then I watched it go up, and I have screenshots of it going up. It was 2.6, and then it went up to 2.9, and then 3.8, and now it's at 4. and that's on average. So half of them are even more than 4. The top ones,
Wow.
again,
Yeah. Well, it's not the median, but yeah.
it might not be.
That's not how numbers work, but that's all right. I'll let you
Well,
slide on it. It'll
that's
be
true.
close enough.
It probably wasn't the median, right? It was probably just the mean or the average. You're right.
Right.
What I should have said, and thanks for correcting me, is that that doesn't preclude the idea that many are still above 4. I'll say that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Um, now, where was I going with this? Oh, just the top 4 or 5 comorbidities I think are influenza and pneumonia, which they lump together, and it bugs the hell out of me because I can't analyze the flu data if they're lumping it with pneumonia. But there's
Right.
that, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, and then like Alzheimer's, I think is the 5th. And there's obesity, there's a whole chain.
Right. So you wouldn't so when the 15,000 flu deaths in LA disappeared, then those numbers suggest that that's a big enough sample that there were tons of people in that group that actually had the flu and maybe even died of the flu that weren't being registered. By that theory, you would say then, right?
So can you say it one more time? I think I almost got it.
So in LA, 15,000, the deaths from flu went from 15,000 to 0. Right. So and that means that if they're classifying the comorbidities the way that you're saying it, it's perfectly reasonable that administrators are saying this is a COVID-related death because they're getting paid for it. But there'd be no reason for them to go test the flu, because if they died from the flu, then that would say that they weren't going to get those things. It's like an administrative, you'd be an administrative fool to test anyone for the flu. You would test every single patient because they're paying you if they died with the positive test result, not if they died of the symptoms of COVID. So as an administrator, I'm testing every single patient because I'm a fool not to.
Yes, no, I see what you're saying. And that it is odd how the flu was like, the flu's like this, and then all of a sudden it's here. And you compare it to other flu seasons, and it goes down slowly. You see all those different curves. And I'm telling you, it's right at that drop happened right after the CARES Act was passed. That's why I'm telling you it's a difference of classification within a system.
That's a strong correlation, yes.
I think. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think it's some collusion or anything absurd.
Incentives, this is the same thing I preach about with policing. Right. These are incentives. Once the incentive goes in place, every single administrator could be responding to this incentive completely in the subconscious. That's the point of incentives and disincentives, is that you aren't thinking about them.
Right. They're just kind of routine or ingrained within your head, right? And they drive your behavior. Yeah. Now, before I forget, let me go over the second big piece of evidence as far as classification goes, was the NVSS's renewed guidelines for death certificates. And I'm sorry, but I forget what the NVSS stands for. It's something statistics. But basically, what they did was they passed these guidelines around the same time that the CARES Act was passed, and they told hospitals and coroners and medical professionals to document death certificates differently. Now, what I mean is, normally you have 2 sections on a death certificate, and I had to read this like 100 times before I got it, so I'll try and go slow. But basically, in normal times, for the past 17 years that the old guidelines were in place, you would say something like, this person died from a heart attack. And then on the line beneath that, you'd say the heart attack was caused by high blood pressure, and then beneath that, a high blood pressure was caused by heart disease or whatever. And then in this lower section 2, you would list all the additional underlying conditions that weren't the direct cause of death. So you might put Alzheimer's, diabetes, I don't know,
cause of death is a gaping wound to the head. Contributing factor was the gun being pulled by some suspect, right? Just so people can understand a dramatic representation of the difference.
Well, yes, and just to really drive home the point, so what I just described was normal. So you have all those main primary causes, and then you have the second the secondary section of additional conditions. What the new guidelines did was they essentially flipped them. And their exact wording was, COVID-19 will be the direct cause of death more often than not. So that means at least 50% of the time, more often than not, they're going to put COVID as that underlying cause of death. Everything else that was up here has been moved to this
Right.
second section of underlying things. Um, and it's funny because in normal times, I found a lot of articles where the doctors were saying, we don't even know how to fill out a death certificate, or we're not trained on this. We have other important things to be doing. And the exact wording in the old guidelines was to use your best medical opinion. So it was an opinion thing before, and now you have these guidelines saying more often than not, put COVID at the top. And I just thought it lined up also with the flu's disappearance
Sure.
and the rise in COVID cases. Exactly. All these things started lining up around the same time period. So again, that's in my article. If anyone wants to read it, you can see it. That's important though, because like you said, I know your example was hyperbolic, Michael, but you could have been injured from something, or if you're already battling your already existing pneumonia and then you get COVID, they're going to put more often than not COVID as your cause of death. Now, you should see a decrease then in people who were already going to die from their already existing pneumonia.
Right.
And it's you don't, because it's lumped with flu, and I wish they didn't do that. But it's like, if flu's going down and flu and pneumonia went up, then what is it, like 99% pneumonia and 1% flu? Like, and you're
Right.
putting
Right.
these
Right.
things together. It's hard for me to describe. If anyone
So
listening
if
is
it was
getting a fraction
true,
of,
yeah, that's the whole thing, is if this statement was true, then this other thing would also be true. And if that other thing isn't true, well, then you have to throw out the initial idea. That's what, if being locked inside and wearing masks and taking all these mitigating measures are the trick to being healthy in a COVID environment, then how is it that the most disgusting of us and the most isolated of us don't have any of the problems? You would have to see that. I'm sorry, but if the plague was going around, Skid Row would be decimated. And now it's like regular old life. There are not excessive bodies laying in the streets of Skid Row. I mean, it would be obvious.
right, or what was the other population, like Hasidic
The
Jews or
Amish,
something? Or
Hasidic
the
Jews,
Amish, yeah.
there's
Yeah.
or like all these people. I guarantee you, if somebody went into the jungle and found some of those last that the tribes that have been non-contacted and they tested them, they would pop positive for COVID. I guarantee it.
Right. And it's different from, again, to compare more data from the past, it's different from the 1919 Spanish flu, because that the average age of death of that flu was like 28. I mean, it was
Because it
people
made
around.
sense.
Right. Well,
That makes
but
sense because the 28-year-olds are going out, they're interacting with one another.
right,
They're the ones that are not caring about this stuff. Now
right,
it's the exact opposite. The people
right,
who don't care don't get sick.
right. And the average age of death is therefore around about
The
what
average age of
the average
death.
age for everything, about
That's
78,
what I'm saying.
79.
If
Yeah.
it's real, you have to see a change. I'm sorry. Okay, let's put it
I
this
think
way.
it would be more obvious. Yeah, go.
Yeah, it's not if if it was a threat worth responding to, we would see dramatically increased evidence right in front of our faces. We would not have to hunt for it. So you're
Uh-huh.
not having something arise from the data. You have an idea that you're trying to make fit the data. And that is the most disingenuous type of science and presentation, and why I get so mad about it and probably freak out on people sometimes and get angry and maybe say things I shouldn't say. But it's you're either willfully ignorant to promote these messages, or you're just trapped in like a mental illness, like a religion where you're just doing tribalism, you're just repeating it. But that just throws out all the people who have died not seeing their loved ones because of some stupid policy that somebody put in. All the businesses
Right.
who have been thrown away because of something that has not even reached a level of theory. I mean, you don't even have enough evidence to call this a legit theory. It's a hypothesis at best. So you're ruining lives. People are suffering. Drug overdoses are going up. And all of this for what? I just can't wrap my head around it.
I I agree. Even when I was really concerned about COVID, I still don't know what is the goal here. Like, what is the long term? Like,
Right.
masks are being brought back in my county. Like, it's funny, whenever I come back to DC from my travels, there's always some new restriction in place, and then I leave and then they open up again. But there, I just wish there was at least more of like we had an idea of what we're trying to reach. Like, are we trying to reach more vaccinated people, and the masks are like a temporary solution? Even if I disagree with all of it, I don't know what the idea
Well, you see
is.
what they're doing in the NFL? I mean,
Yeah, you get like 85. Yeah, go.
well, the way that the Vikings quarterback, what's his name? Why can't Kirk Cousins? The way Kirk Cousins is being treated right now is mind blowing.
Yeah.
You know, he hasn't been sick. He hasn't gotten sick. It's been that just he violated arbitrary procedures, and they kicked him out of his job. And now his boss is looking at him like he's the problem because the rules that they created, although he is perfectly fine, perfectly healthy, has done nothing wrong as a human being operating this society, and they're releasing all of his information. So they're setting up these things and they're telling people to explain whether they're vaccinated or not. And if they're not, they're going to have to give away their medical information. The invasion of privacy on top of it is this kind of really just mind-blowing thing going on that people are giving into. And I really see how the naysayers about encroaching authoritarianism, I mean, I can see where they're coming from for sure.
Right. No, it is. I was just going to say something about that. The people getting vaccinated. Oh, it's literally creating a second-class citizen when they do that.
Right, absolutely. And even these elites, like, I mean, right now, when you talk about arbitrary rules, just how they play out in the real world, like Lamar Jackson, the quarterback for the Ravens. He tested positive last year, got put under protocol and got in trouble, right? Now this year, he popped positive again, got suspended for 10 games and put into the protocol. And so he's like, bro, I thought I had antibodies. Like, is it getting sick the same as having the vaccine? Like, that's what all the science has always told us. And they're like, no, you're in trouble. Like, you're gonna ruin this guy's career because literally he followed everything we've been told about vaccines in the past. I mean,
I've been to several states, Michael, where they act like natural immunity from infection just isn't a thing. It doesn't exist, and so it means nothing if you've already had it.
Vaccine is working. What I don't understand. The vaccine assists you in developing your natural immune response. I don't understand.
It should, yeah. And it's funny about the vaccine. We could talk a little about the vaccine. None of my articles talk about it, but it is the one thing I kind of don't know a lot about yet because it's still pretty recent. But cases were decreasing, and then reported cases, and then the vaccine was widely distributed, and they were still decreasing, and now you're kind of seeing them go up again. And I know you shared one article with me, or one study. I think it was a CDC study. Yeah, they said that 74% of all of their hospitalized patients were vaccinated, not unvaccinated. So there are studies that point to that idea, if that makes sense. Whereas,
well, that all makes sense to me in the common cold idea. The whole reason we gave up on fighting the common cold is because it mutates too rapidly and it's not worth our effort.
Well, okay.
We don't create vaccines for the common cold because we realized the amount of harm that it gave wasn't worth whatever it was going to take because it was such a moving target that it wasn't worth fighting. That's why the common cold is not fought. It mutates too quick. There's no point in dealing with it.
Yeah.
So if the coronavirus, which the common cold is just the coronavirus. So if we are talking about coronaviruses, the common cold, yes, you're not going to be able to vaccinate. We knew this long ago because it moves too fast. So that's like you're trying to do something that we already knew was impossible.
Right. We already knew. Exactly. I mean, it's funny. It's like you said, so many of these areas that they don't let COVID become their reality, and you look at them and they're doing just fine. Like I drove through Cheyenne, Wyoming, and they had this event called Frontier Days or something like that, Frontier whatever, where it was this big country get together, and they do it every year. Maybe they didn't do it last year. They have a bunch of country singers and horses and like cowboy people, whatever, and they were. Yeah, I don't know. People dressed as cowboys, whatever. They were having a good time. I couldn't book a hotel there because it was like 300, 400 a night, and because it was so expensive. But they didn't let COVID become the reality. I'm sure in Phoenix, I mean, you've messaged me saying like, dude, I don't know what you're like hung up about. Like, this isn't, nobody talks about this here. Like, what is the mood like here with COVID in your place with
Well,
COVID?
the businesses will like right now, there's nothing happening, but occasionally, not too long ago, businesses would make you wear a mask when you came in. They did shut down the gyms for a while back in the day, but it was like the only thing you ever hear anybody really saying, for the most part, is people complaining about the mask. You're like, oh
Okay.
crap, I don't have a mask or something like that. Going into the store, this is so annoying. That's all you hear.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, I mean, this is definitely a purple area. And so going around, I mean, I'll see people at the grocery store with their mask on and their gloves on. And when I get near them, like they scoot over a couple feet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this crazy person. But you got to have empathy for them. They're believing the sources that for most people, their lives, they've been told to believe these sources of authority, that there was no need to dig deeper because the New York Times is telling the truth, because the president wouldn't lie to you. But
Right.
the reality is that of course the New York Times lied to you. They've always lied to you, and yes, presidents lie to you. It's like their job.
Right. It's like their job.
I
Yeah,
mean, literally.
politicians don't lie. Yeah.
But not
um,
even like then, just because they have access to information. So anyone with access to top secret information or with an authority to like regulate society. I mean, you don't, if the War of the Worlds really happened, the worst thing to do is to put out a radio broadcast that, they have to get on the air and lie to you. That's the responsible thing to do. Sometimes when you're in a position of authority, the responsible thing is the lie. I'm not saying the presidents are bad for lying. It's what they do.
right, of course. It is what they do. Yeah. I thought it was funny. I mean, how they scooted away from you. But Michael, they could, we can't do bad science and make a leap of faith here. Maybe they recognized you from one of your insane videos and they said, there's that
Right.
weird police guy. So who knows? But I was gonna say another thing. Oh, just that I don't know if you know cases like this, but I know some people who live together in small houses too, and maybe one of them gets COVID and the other doesn't.
Right.
For a virus that we're told spreads so easily. That's kind of interesting. Like I know these two sisters in Virginia, and one of them got it, the other didn't. My sister actually just tested positive, and she's in Scotland, and she got it. She tested positive after her first vaccine. And over in Scotland, you have to wait 8 weeks until your second, whereas here it's like 3 or 4. So she already had one, and then her boyfriend, who she lives with, doesn't have it either. So it's just interesting. You would think everyone in this small community at these hot spreader events or whatever they're labeled as should be getting it. Now she hasn't been feeling well. She might be doing better now. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't heard the last update, but I think she had like a low grade fever, and I think she's maybe the first jab is helping relieve some of the worser symptoms.
You sound like somebody playing the system. I mean, there's no deviation from the system from before vaccines and after vaccines. Again, the only difference you see is testing differences.
Right. Well, I know it's annoying. I don't know how effective
There's
the vaccines
not even enough time has passed to make conclusions.
Right.
Like that's a rough thing about like why it can't be tested. It's because you don't have enough time. It takes time for these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So to reach any conclusion, that's what I'm saying about just knowing. I mean, you could be right. Anyone could be right about any of these things.
Right.
But to say them as statements of fact is extremely far from the truth of our understanding of it. I mean,
I got you.
and everything I dismiss everything I've heard because nothing other than it being just a common cold and a coronavirus, the common cold's adaptions. Nothing, there's no evidence that correlates to lived experience and the reality. Even the idea of it coming from Wuhan and spreading, again, it doesn't make any sense. How did it get to Papua New Guinea and the tip of Chile and a week? What? No, I'm sorry. It's just it can't travel that fast. Everywhere you went, everyone already had it because it was already everywhere. It's the cold, people. Like, that's the only thing I would say, but there's no evidence to say it deviates from the normal cold.
Right. And or I would say the normal flu. I mean, I know it's a coronavirus, and the common cold is a coronavirus, but um, like one of the symptoms
I
you
mean,
hear
in its
about.
behavior. Could it be a bad
Oh, okay,
version of the common cold? Sure, but its
okay,
behavior is completely aligned with the common cold.
gotcha. But if we talk about symptoms for a second, like the loss of smell, loss of taste, that's possible with the
Measure
flu
that
as well.
objectively, man. Measure that objectively, and I'll believe it.
You mean like maybe they could be convincing themselves that they've lost it, but they really haven't? Or
Well, I mean, everything else that they've convinced it of, why would we think differently? I don't know why we would do that.
well, what if like if somebody takes a sip of their coffee and they can't taste it? You're
Right,
not
but
attributing.
if that was coming from an environment where so this is going back to our philosophies about free will. If they were going back to a world where that wasn't on their menu, I would believe it. But this is just like any other self-reported study. I don't buy this one bit. Did I lose my taste of, like, when you've been told and you give empathy points? It's like people that think they've been subjected to racism. It's like, yeah, if no one told you that, would you really think, oh, I know what it is? It's because my skin's darker. Like, I
Right.
mean, come on, it's so dumb. It's
I see.
obviously
I
not the
see.
case.
I see what you're saying. It's like a multiple choice test, as you say, right? Like our minds are so impressionable that
Right.
every experience changes us, and so we then have that option of, oh, I've heard on the news that you can lose your sense of smell and taste. Maybe I'm sort of
Yeah, even
that
simpler than that. If I say to you, oh, how is your sense of taste and smell? Did you lose any of it?
mhm.
Then you're going to
Yeah,
say anything. Say so. You might be like, oh, yeah, I have.
yeah, right.
But if it was never on the test and they said, what are your symptoms? You're like, oh, I got a fever, had a runny nose. And they would have never written anything
Right.
about that.
No, you're
So,
so yeah.
yeah,
I,
I
I
just
was
don't
just gonna
buy it.
I was just gonna say that totally reminds me. I remember when I was working as a waiter in a restaurant, um, my manager said, he said, "How do you check in on your tables?" And I said something like, um, "Is what would I say? I'd say like, is everything okay here, or is anything wrong?" Or it was something kind of a little
Yeah,
weird,
don't
like
say
with a
wrong.
negative connotation. I know. And he just said, "Go over and say, did everything come out good?" Or something like that, because you want to fill. It's like a psychology game. You want to fill their mind with a positive idea. I was leaving it open for criticism
Right.
when and they said, "Well, if something is wrong, actually, yeah, the my tea isn't warm enough or whatever." But
Right.
well, let's just say I totally see what you're saying, Michael. But let's say that it somehow it is proven objectively that loss of taste and smell is a symptom of
Sure.
COVID. All I was going to say is that I found documented cases where that was also true in the flu. So where
Mm.
they reported that same symptom. So I was just saying, my whole thing is nothing about COVID stands out to me. It's
Sure. Yeah.
all these symptoms come from something else. Even long COVID, they say the long COVID haulers, which isn't most of them. It's not the
What is that?
majority, but you, like someone who's dealing with a COVID symptom like months after they were diagnosed, like they're on meds and stuff. Even that is true with the flu. That you just don't hear about it because it's not novel. The flu's been around
Sure.
forever. The media is not covering it. I literally couldn't find anything other than
Yeah,
the
it's
incubation.
Corona novel. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't even align with being novel.
It's Corona novels. Are you just because
Yeah, I
it's
mean, they say it is, but it doesn't align with being novel.
oh uh-huh.
If it was novel, we would watch the spread. We've never been able to watch the spread because it was always everywhere.
So what was the point? You told me months back. You're like, how can it be in Wuhan but not Beijing or something like
Yeah, it
that? There
didn't
was like,
make any sense. I mean, I was only talking about a simple leap. I
right,
was talking about how could Wuhan be ravaged in even one day? Because if they don't know about it for one day, there was something like 1,000 flights each day from Wuhan to Beijing. Because these are cities like this is like New York times two going to New York times two,
right,
right?
right.
So that's how many flights are going back and forth between these two cities. And so one day of travel would make these two cities the exact same place. And they're saying they didn't notice the lockdowns for like a week or two. So if a week or two went past with travel from Wuhan to Beijing, you would need the exact same lockdown methods in Beijing than you would need in Wuhan. There's no way to distinguish these two cities from one another, just like there'd be no real way to distinguish people from LA and New York. If People, an outbreak happened in LA. That outbreak is going to New York. That's its next destination. It's not freaking Malibu. The people are, there's not a whole bunch of people driving from LA to Malibu. They're getting on airplanes and they're going to New York. There's way more people that would do that. You'd literally see it go to New York before you would see it go to Malibu. So you
Right.
would see these things all the time. Beijing and Wuhan and Beijing would have been parallels for the amount of people affected just because there's too many people driving back and forth. But at that same time, you're telling me about the same amount of people in Beijing have it as the people in New Zealand. That doesn't make any sense. And the countries with low vaccination rates, like Australia, is like at 60% or something like that, which is one of the lower ones. Their overall numbers still aren't different than places that have 100% vaccination. We have travel orders from the CDC that says you can't go to places that have 100% vaccination rates.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Right? So these are the things that none of this stuff lines up with how a novel virus would behave, or how if the vaccines worked, or how if masks works, or if how social distancing works. None of it aligns.
So is it just general like human incompetence? Like people are trying hard to discover the truth, but we're just wrong on a lot of what we think is going on? Like why is this so off?
I have no idea, but it seems if people think it makes sense, they just adapt it. Just like how all throughout the world, everybody was like, "Yeah, totally, the Earth's flat makes sense." Well, I mean, they were all wrong.
Right.
That made sense from your perspective, but it was just wrong.
Yeah, no, I've never the majority rules is always a logical fallacy. They can all always be agreeing in a wrong opinion. um
Right.
and the person who always advances science, isn't it, it's usually somebody from outside. It's someone who disagrees, but
Cast.
it's also like if you take all the candle makers, it was someone who was studying electricity who came up with the light bulb. It wasn't a candle maker.
Right.
Right.
Why are we talking about hospitals? I mean, it's the same thing. Like these doctors, like Fauci, he's a superstar now. He's a celebrity now. He has every bit of subconscious incentive to keep all of this going. Yeah, it's just, I say the same thing about policing. I think this one reason why this probably bothers me is because I see all these parallels to the same lines of thinking that I see in policing, whether it comes to juking the stats or believing these long held principles like that locking a bunch of people will stop them from doing crimes. And it's like, no, like that just, there's no evidence anywhere that happens. I mean, sure, you can do for a short time frame. You can be a totalitarian group that locks everybody up. But if you just step back a little bit, you give that 5 or 10 years and those people rebel. It doesn't work. You
Right.
can't.
Well,
You literally can't.
if anything, it sows the seeds for more crime, right? For more violence.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, the
And seeds for more paranoia, especially medical paranoia. When we all watch movies, like we all know that this is like some made up like Hollywood concept. The thing is like if it was real, it wouldn't come at us like the last 40 movies we've watched.
right.
Right.
Well, I wanted to touch on Fauci for a second because I have noticed that he's flip flopped on a few different things. Like everything. I can't really follow him. But
All right.
the
Last topic, and then I gotta
okay.
go.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I was just going to say he said in early April that the number of cases was at a disturbingly high level. And I went through each day in April, and the highest it got was 85,000. And I did the math, and I said, even if you had 85,000 every day for a year straight, it still wouldn't equal the number of flu cases that you get in 3 months. Like, I'm just trying to put this in perspective. Yeah, I did the math. It's like 34 million. It's not 36 million. 36 million was the flu in 3 months. Most of it in 3 months, maybe 4 or 5 if you want to be more precise. But I don't know, a few other really quick things. It was interesting to see, states with high regulations against COVID versus states that did nothing, like Arkansas versus Oklahoma. They show similar trends. Sweden did absolutely nothing, and their cases went down, and then they came back up. But they came back up at a time when every other country, or most countries in the winter, were also seeing it. Anyway, I know you got to go. I appreciate you talking about this. I know this isn't your domain, and I don't have a domain. I just happen to find a lot of this data interesting, and I encourage anyone listening to read my pieces. If you want more of just the data, I really try and limit my opinions on these things as much as possible in the writing. So it's pretty raw and it's pretty boring and it's pretty long. But if you want to learn, they're there for you.
Yeah, and most people that are watching this know that I'm always going to hold somebody's feet to the fire when it comes to them making claims or saying they know something.
Right.
And this is not a new topic. You and I have been going back and forth on this since it started. So It's not like your research is new. I understand this isn't your field, but I bet most people in the field haven't done the amount of researching and digging to find the truth that you can in this, especially with this particular issue. So I still owe reading one of his articles, and I said I was going to read it, put it on there, but like I explained, that's why I'm on a cell phone. I got so much going on. The photography stuff is like all kinds of. That's why I got to go. I got to go do it.
Right. Well, feel free to read it. Feel free if you read it if you'd like. That's about it. I got nowhere to go with this. So believe whatever you want. I'm always down to talk with anyone listening. That's all I got.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. It was nice talking to you, Sully. I always like talking to you. Smart kid. But everybody, you got to save him. He is trapped in the crazy liberal mindset. And every once in a while, he comes to me and he's like, well, what about this one? And I'm like, they didn't suddenly come up with some new ability to create logic, man. But
the accuracy is true with that. All right. Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure as always. You take care.
Peace, brother.
All right. Bye.
Old school like the landline. This man's rhymes kinda sorta like a landmine. I'm stone cold and if I throw it, I'm a landmine. And y'all just need to put a sock in it like mankind. I can't lie. Most of these stands I am not a fan and I ain't playing. I'm applying science like the Iron Man. Defying it, I'm crying the alliance that you lying in. We end up in a lion's den or maybe in a frying pan. Either way you getting hate though. This ain't the late show. But you shacking a fool and getting booted like safe mode. Network them networks. Stomp you a dang chump. A man punk that don't belong near my command prompt. Fan of it, they amateurs, no need to pandering. Moving forward like progress, they still like mannequins. Guess that I can answer this, you sort of like philanthropists. Cause I'm breaking the mics and y'all paying for the damages. Off the scale like hippopotamus weight. And you just off the rails and gotta be fake. It gotta be fake. Lot on the plate is possible, you got in a way. A lot of y'all is trying to be great, so why would you wait? And some are like to try to relate that I got a big ego. But we know that's just a projection and even he know. You see those, they're called haters, and you really need those. They keep your name relevant when you gotta compete. So pitch perfect like Neo singing a C-note. Producer slapping bass like Tito. I'm walking moves like his brother Michael, but I'm clutch like the Jordan one. And you DeAndre shooting a free throw. You be broke, herb balling like a nudist. I'm not foolish, solid economics like the Jewish. What I'm doing is from here to Budapest. I'm grinding, growing like she a pest. Your best bet, don't be a pest and just accept that he's the best. The debate is not up for you in an uproar. Talking at your behind, but you can stick it up yours. I'm the real deal, and at best you are folklore. Level me with these cats, I'm sitting thinking what for. At any time, dropping plenty rounds, many lines. I know all of your circles connected like the Olympic sign, but I'm still running things like Bruce before the sex change. You ain't built to last because you frail without the best frame. Get it cracked like you under pressure, or a nut plus you nutty like that one professor. I get it cracking like an acorn, y'all, and you just acorn ball. Can say I suck, but that ain't your call. And you can challenge me in rhyming, but that ain't gon' fall. That ain't gon' fall. It's like I'm 98 overall. I'm too tough and stuff, and that is just the weight of my balls. And yeah, I'm fed up with y'all, but I ain't scared of y'all. Yeah, I'm bodying rappers, y'all are some slackers. Y'all could get body faster than Bruce Lee karate actors. I am a factor. You dudes suck. I don't know what you trying to rap for. Compared to me, y'all are minions. I am the master. Mic check. I am the best. I am defying the rest. I am freaking dying to get in a rap war like an iron and vest. No, a wreck war, but it's dying effects. I am complex. I am not simple. My mentor is far ahead of you. I am not scared of you. I'm like the hawk if he's blew up.